excited. Taking my friends, open up a bottle. I'm like, oh yeah, this is one called 100 Years of Solitude. It's barrel-aged barley. Open it up, and it's like, this is $150 a bottle. And everyone will be like, it tastes like feet.
Hey, Drinking Buddies. This is the 4th episode of the Drinking Buddy Show. I'm your host, Frank Rogers, and in this episode, I'll be introducing Nankai Shochu co-founder Paul Nakayama, learning about how he went from tech to craft beverages and finding out how he finally got his friends to finally like shochu. If you enjoy the show, be sure to subscribe and share it with a buddy. Let's get started. What do you think of when you hear the word shochu? Do you think anything at all? Perhaps you think it's the same thing as Korean soju. Maybe you know it's usually made from barley or sweet potato. Regardless, if you were at the bar, you'd probably order tequila, vodka, or whiskey instead. Well, I chatted with Paul Nakayama to find out why so many people have got shochu all wrong.
I started Nankai Shochu with my wife roughly 2 years ago. Before that, I was mostly in tech, doing either content programming, program management, business development, just lots of geeky tech stuff. And then I took a short sabbatical to do some writing because we are in LA and that's what everyone does, right? They write a screenplay.
Oh, good. You got a screenplay. Fantastic. Fantastic.
Yeah, and then I met Mai and kind of decided to start working again and started off doing some consulting. And then eventually got married.
Now let's take it back even further. So are you originally from Los Angeles?
Born and raised in LA, yeah. In fact, the hospital I was born in was called the Queen of Angels. It's no longer there.
The Queen of Angels?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is it all motorcycles in front? Or
No. I think it was a Catholic hospital or something like that.
Yeah.
Though my parents were definitely not part of that.
Yeah. And then did you have any brothers or sisters?
I have a younger sister.
Okay.
Yeah.
How far apart are you guys?
Just 2 years.
2 years.
Yeah.
Very nice.
And she's got 3 kids.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Very nice. So what was it like growing up in LA? What were you like as a kid? What did you do? I mean, you mentioned writing. Were you writing as a kid?
I was always in the creative space.
Yeah.
Yeah. Loved comic books and Dungeons and Dragons growing up. Pretty much a geek.
You're a dungeon master?
I am a dungeon master.
All right.
Not a very good one, but I'm still a dungeon master. Sounds wrong. By the way, for those listening, we're not talking about anything weird. We're talking about role-playing games.
Kids role-playing.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not the master of an actual dungeon.
We don't have to go there.
I'll clarify here.
Yeah, exactly. Especially in LA, that's true. You got to clarify.
Yeah, I might get the wrong
Very nice.
Friend request.
Where'd you end up going to college?
I went to Berkeley. Entered the undergraduate business program there at Haas. Before that, I grew up originally in Alhambra in the Valley, and then moved to Torrance in my high school years. And I actually went to a place called Narbonne, which was a really cool school. They have a really strong sports program, but what most people don't know is they have a really strong science and math magnet. Ended up falling in love with everything there, and they had a really great organization called Key Club, which is Key Club, right? So volunteering. And that really kind of got me out of my shell and got me to kind of open up and speak more publicly. I couldn't do that before, so.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Was it a big fear of yours?
No, I mean, I was just really shy growing up.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Definitely would not be doing any of the speeches that I do now, or even this podcast. I'd be hiding in that corner where they're just kind of waving at you.
no workshops like you do.
No dungeon mastering, yeah.
No master of the dungeon. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That's funny.
But yeah, and then that kind of gave me the confidence to pursue business, which was not necessarily my first pick, but eventually kind of where I felt the most comfortable. But even then, I always felt a draw towards the more creative side of things, writing and things of that nature.
So you're going to the school Narbonne, you said. Mm-hmm. Did you play any sports or do any clubs? Just you had Key Club?
Sports.
No sports? Okay. Yeah. He says that, but he's not like really skinny or anything.
I'm on the other end of the spectrum.
400 pounds.
Exactly.
That's actually what we're here to talk about. Yeah. This painful journey. No, just kidding. Okay. So, and then you go to Berkeley, you're doing your undergraduate in business. Mm-hmm. Do you continue to grad school or did you start working?
I did. I started working. My first job out of school was I worked for a Japanese trading company called Mitsui. They're one of the big ones in Japan. And that was kind of an eye-opening thing because the way companies run in Japan are quite different from the way they run here, right?
Can you give us some examples for people that wouldn't know?
Yeah, I mean, basically, kind of one of the biggest tenets of Japanese business, I think, is the concept of seniority. So it's not based on performance merits. It's based on how long you're at that company, how loyal you are. You have to pay your dues and then work your way up. And, me being young and full of vigor and ideas, it was hard for me to kind of fit in for a while. And also, of course, there is a drinking culture.
How often were you out drinking with your team?
So I didn't drink at all in college, right? Then all of a sudden I'm thrust into this Japanese business world where quite literally I was out drinking with my boss every single night until 2 a.m. or so, then be back at the office around 7, and it was kind of a hard life, and I kind of really hated alcohol. My relationship to alcohol at that point was one of trauma and torture.
And was it you and a bunch of people, or just he would take you all the time, or?
He would take a few of us, but I was doing sales for that group, and so it was a lot of times he and I going out entertaining clients, or yeah.
Nice. And so pretty much every night, 2 a.m.
It was rough, yeah.
Weekends too?
Occasionally, we take business trips to Seattle or New York, and those would kind of run into the weekend sometimes, and it would be one long kind of binge fest.
So how long did that continue for?
I was able to do for about maybe 2 to 3 years before I just finally decided that I needed something else.
Wow, you hung in there for a while.
I did, yeah. I switched over to video game distribution. A friend of mine from high school got into this really cool company downtown. At the time, which was around when PlayStation 2 came out, video games were really booming. And so it was when eToys, Amazon, all these guys were selling video games online. I was the first one at the company to kind of open up e-commerce. So that was really exciting.
And we're talking still consoles, not streaming.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this was like 98 through 2002-ish, maybe.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was kind of really my entry into like hardcore sales, where you're cold calling all the time. And back then I had done it so much that I thought that I hated sales. I would never want to do it again. The awkwardness of cold calling, the feeling guilty of interrupting someone's day to see if they wanted something.
Did you have long prospect lists?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. We go to conferences and collect business cards and call them up again, and that whole thing. It was a good experience. I definitely think it's something that everyone should do at some point in their lives.
Right. It's a valuable skill, especially if you're going to be in business.
Yeah, because you kind of empathize then with other salespeople and what they have to go through to kind of make their quotas and get things done. And so, it's good to see those side of things.
I think it's true. I think in my experience as a hospitality salesperson, it does give you some empathy, but it also at the same time, it makes you almost despise people that are really bad at it.
That's true too.
Yeah, like if you see people that are like their sales techniques are just so obvious and so poorly done.
Or, one of the things that really made me want to leave that industry eventually was there was a lot of lying. The managers would be like, we want you to push this because so and so and so. And I kind of grew up a goody two-shoes, and it was kind of hard for me to...
Didn't want to mislead the people you're talking to.
Yeah, exactly. I wanted to be honest and upfront about things. And so that definitely got me in trouble a couple of times.
So how long were you there then?
I did that industry between 2 different companies about 4 or 5 years or so. Yeah.
So first trading and then video games.
Yeah.
And then you move on to what?
After that, I got hired by a company in Japan, a subsidiary of JVC. And at the time, they were doing this weird security technology where they would burn encrypted CD-ROMs that you would use to store special information. And so they thought, how these days on credit cards we have like the RF chips?
Sure.
So it was that kind of concept, but a little bit more basic than that. And so I was in charge of business development for America, trying to get that technology adopted. And it was tough. So I moved to San Jose for that. Did that for about 2 years before I got recruited into a ringtone company.
Ringtone company?
At the same office that I worked. And so I did that for a couple of years as well.
What year is that when you started doing ringtones?
maybe 2004, 2005-ish.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I was going to say, it's got to be still early 2000s.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically when AT&T, Verizon, Sprint, all those guys launched their ringtone services, and everyone's going crazy for ringtones.
Yeah, I think for the youngest listeners, they wouldn't even know about that.
Yeah, I mean, no one does ringtones anymore.
Yeah, late 90s, early 2000s. Yeah, there's the ringtones, and before that, there was the cases that would like light up and do all this crazy stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Like you never see any of that anymore. Yeah.
But it's interesting. So that experience, so the ringtone industry was a brand new industry in music. And even the people that are from the music labels and the performing rights organizations, they themselves didn't have clear-cut rules around how to monetize ringtones. On one end of things, they wanted to charge a lot of money for it, but it wasn't practical. On the other end, with music rights and streaming rights, there are a lot of rules, particularly around making sure that every writer gets paid. Well, back in the days when it first started with ringtones, the hottest songs were all hip-hop songs. And hip-hop songs tend to have a lot of writers. And each writer is not necessarily represented by the same group. So what this taught me was, and I didn't know anything about music licensing at the time, so I had to do a lot of research on my own. And that research that I did for music licensing was kind of the backbone of research that allowed me to start Nankai, because I didn't know anything about the alcohol industry either. And so, learning about the music industry, figuring out how that works, was generally the kind of the seed for giving me the confidence to eventually pursue alcohol as well.
I wouldn't think that ringtones would be that music licensing would be the spawn.
Yeah, I guess it's more about being okay not being in your comfort zone.
Something you weren't familiar with, and you had to do the research and had to.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's similar with you, right? I mean, you probably weren't that entrenched in the food industry or food distribution industry.
No, I'm learning everything right now. Yeah. Absolutely, yeah. No, it's true.
That's come from somewhere, right? So, yeah.
That's true. Yeah, because I definitely feel like I'm just treading water right now.
I think that's all of us, man.
All right, so you're doing the music licensing with the ringtones.
That led to getting recruited into a company called Amped Mobile.
Oh, yeah, I remember them.
Yeah. So Amped Mobile was kind of the rebel MVNO. It was a leased network. So we leased our network from Verizon. We created our own brand, created our own content, distributed our own music, TV shows, movies, games before the network could even really support it. And so we were really trying to change the game. It was a startup, quite famously crashed and burned, primarily because of overspending. We were housed in the former production lot for 24, that TV show.
Okay.
Yeah, so Jack Bauer's CTU headquarters was our office, which was kind of cool. And then from there, I just did a couple more things with my boss at the time. We did Clearwire, which was a company doing an alternative technology to LTE. It was called WiMAX. So doing, 4G network stuff, building brand apps for that. We built out the first kind of pay-as-you-go 4G network. And then did something called Magic Jack, which was a VoIP service. And so that kind of really gave me my sense of what a good brand is, or how to develop a brand.
Now, this whole time that you're getting deeper and deeper into the tech, obviously you had that traumatic experience with drinking right out of college.
Yeah.
Had you stopped drinking at this point, or?
In my 20s, I didn't drink all that much. Occasionally with friends or my roommate, but I was definitely a lot softer on that until I hit my 30s, close to my 30s, yeah. And then I started to appreciate alcohol a little bit more on my own terms. It was then that I started kind of realizing that there are different grades to alcohol. There are definitely acquired tastes versus, things that are just good for everyone. So that really got me on the path of trying to discover different types of alcohol. And I was really more of a whiskey guy, I think. I liked a lot of the Japanese ones, a lot of Scotch, Irish whiskeys. I didn't really get into bourbon or rye until my 40s, probably.
I think when you're younger, I don't see too many young guys that are into whiskey. There might be a few, but I think it's something that goes with age. I don't know why, but I think it soothes you more when you're older and you have more life experience versus when you're young and you're just looking to party.
Yeah.
It's not something you can just do. You shouldn't be really doing shots of it, and you shouldn't be drinking it really fast.
Actually, it was funny. So in my 30s, there was a bar in Culver City called Bigfoot. And just when craft cocktails were kind of really kicking off in LA, their bar manager would home brew pickle juice. So they would make their own pickles, and then they would use the brine as a pickleback. That was my first time kind of enjoying that and really learning about pairings, right? Because you would never expect, first of all, to drink pickle juice sounds gross, but when you actually do it and you pair it with a whiskey, it really does complement each other and brings out additional flavors that you wouldn't normally get. And so that really kind of intrigued me. It became this huge, almost addiction among my friends and I. And that kind of was the inspiration for our own picklebacks.
Paul remained single and focused on his career well into his late 30s. That was until fate intervened.
My wife and I, we met in my early 30s at my mom's bar. She had worked there part-time for a couple of months.
So your mom owned a bar?
She managed the bar, and it was actually kind of our second home, really. The place is gone now, but it was quite famous in Torrance, Gardena.
What was it called?
Daruma.
Daruma.
Some of the people that went to Daruma back in the day and knew my mom are some people that are helping me now with Nankai. Met my wife there. We didn't date, but we became friends. She went back to Japan. We stayed friends on Facebook, and then about 8 years later, we kind of met up again.
She was there for a few months working.
Yeah, she was studying English, was kind of working, I think, part-time, or not even work. Yeah, just kind of
like kind of a couple shifts here and there.
Yeah.
And you just met her, no romance at the time, just
I was really into her.
You were into her, okay.
I mean, yeah, I don't know what she thought about me, but
yeah, okay. Okay, I was going to say, you stayed in touch for 8 years on Facebook. So what brought her, did you go out to Japan after 8 years? Did she come back to LA?
At the time, my writing partner and I, so we were writing a screenplay together, and we would often write at this one bar in West LA called Blue, Karaoke Blue. And super loud there, kind of obnoxious, but it was kind of our place. And I remember having a drink with Ed. We were just talking about something, and I had said to Ed, I am done with girls. I am just going to focus on the screenplay here with you, my friend. We're going to do this. This is a great idea. Let's do it. And then about 30 minutes later, my phone chimes, and it's a message on Facebook from my now wife.
Wow.
And she's like, hey, just want to see how you guys are doing, you and your mom. I just had a dream about you of all things. And I remember looking over at Ed. I'm like, Ed, forget everything I said. At the time, I really, for some reason, was not thinking I was ever going to get married. And, it's true what they say. You meet the right one, and all of a sudden, something clicks inside of you, and you change your mind.
So she reached out? Yeah.
And then she flew out to LA, and we visited. She visited for a little while, went back, visited again, and eventually I flew out to Japan and stayed with her for a while. It was during that time when we realized, if we want to keep doing this, then there has to be a more efficient, economical way of having a relationship other than flying back and forth all the time. So eventually we decided to get married, and she moved out to LA.
Paul's meeting and eventually marrying his wife would not be the only fateful event in his life. It was only the beginning.
Now, she's from a small island, right?
She is. So she was born and raised in Kagoshima. Her dad works for the city government, the prefectural government. And as part of his job, he had to travel around different parts of the prefecture, and they lived there 2 years at a time or whatever. But her father and mother were both born and raised on Amami Island, Amami Oshima. It's off the southwest coast, far south, very tropical, very Hawaii-like. It's still relatively untouched by tourism, and their main crop is sugarcane. And in fact, it was during our honeymoon that we went back to visit some of the islands and came across what would eventually become Nankai Shochu.
Now, was she aware of shochu production down there before you guys went, or?
Yeah, Kagoshima, that area, or Kyushu in general, huge into shochu making. In fact, you can consider it the capital, really. But the primary kind of ingredient that they use for shochu down there is sweet potato. Well, in some parts are, of course, barley. Sweet potato and barley are kind of the two main staples for shochu. It's also the only shochu that I knew about. I really always enjoyed shochu, but could never get my friends to drink it.
Why not?
With shochu is what's called single distilled. You run the distillation process through the still just once. In contrast, most other spirits like whiskey, definitely vodka and gin, you run it through the still multiple times. And in America, the marketing kind of makes you think that multi-distilled is good for you or better. So with shochu being single distilled, you're going to keep everything. And that's both good and bad. If you're really into it, it's going to have a lot of complex nuances that people that love shochu really love. But if you've never had it before, it can be a little off-putting. The closest comparison I can make is probably something like mezcal. Mezcal is double distilled, and it's a lot harder for people to kind of just jump into right away. My dad, he was a sushi chef in Hawaii, and he would be gifted all these rare shochu bottles from Japan, and he would actually mail them over to me. And I'd be so excited, taking my friends, open up a bottle, and be like, oh yeah, this is one called 100 Years of Solitude. It's barrel-aged barley. And open it up, and it's like, this is $150 a bottle. And everyone would be like, tastes like feet. Totally break my heart. And
you don't want to hear that.
But what I realized, was it's because of the single distillation. And also, back to that, in Japan, both sake and shochu use this thing called koji to ferment. And so that gives a lot of distinct flavors as well. All of that combined made shochu kind of an isolated, I think, category in the States. But so going out to Amami, where their main crop is sugarcane, you come across a different variety of shochu altogether. But even with the sugarcane shochu, because it's single distilled, if it's produced via what's called atmospheric distillation, which is the normal heat distillation, right, where you just boil something at high temperature and capture that alcohol, you're going to still get that funkiness. It's going to be like a funky rum. But what I came across was a vacuum-distilled black sugar shochu. And that was an eye-opening experience for me. Because up until that point, most shochus were always kind of in your face and just kind of hitting you over the head. This one was so smooth and so easy to drink. And I remember this moment because we had gone caving on this island called Okino Erabu, which is a tiny island you can actually circumnavigate in about 30 minutes by car. And they have these underground caving networks. And so my wife and I, just for fun, went caving. And it was pretty exhausting. And so after we came out, we went to this one izakaya. And they had this huge, long shelf with every single sugarcane shochu or black sugar shochu that they had on the island, from the islands. And so I was like, this is awesome. I'm going to try every single one down the line. My Japanese is okay, but it's not perfect. And so I remember at the bar, I was switching between English and Japanese speaking to my wife. And some locals, these old guys that were drinking in a corner, overheard us. And one of them got up and walked over to us. And at first, I thought he was going to start some trouble or kick us out or whatever. But no, he was like, I noticed that you're drinking all the shochus here. If you're going to drink any of them, just drink this one. And it happened to be one, I think, towards the end of the shelf. And so it would have taken me a long time to get to that one eventually, I think. And so he gave me a glass. He gave a glass to my wife and I. We both took a sip, and we were just blown away. And before we knew it, we had finished a bottle each in, I think, maybe a 2 or 3 hour time frame. The next day, I didn't get a single headache. I was totally fine. And so thinking that it was travel adrenaline, I did it again just to test it out. And again, no hangover. And so I was like, I remember that the guy gave us a business card from the distillery that made that shochu. And so we decided to take I think it was like a 12-hour boat ride over to the main island where the distillery was located. We rented a car and drove out there to a tour, went into their lab where they were kind of trying out different formulas and stuff, and just fell in love with everything they were making there. And so on the flight home, I remember constantly just thinking about it. And the thing that kind of stuck out to me was, of all the shochus I'd ever had, it was the one that I thought I could convince my friends to try and drink because it was so approachable. But the distillery is so small compared to like the main shochu distilleries that I knew that they would never be sold in the States. And if I ever wanted, to drink it again, I'd have to go back to that island, buy it, and bring it back again. And so that's kind of when the idea started percolating. And we thought, well, what if we started bringing it in ourselves? Of course, didn't know anything about the alcohol industry. We had gone to the ABC, which is the Alcoholic Beverage Control, and asking them about how to get the licenses necessary to sell shochu or import shochu and then sell it. And I remember shochu being so rare of a category that even the ABC didn't know. Korean soju is so popular here. There is a separate loophole law that allows beer and wine restaurants to be able to sell a distilled spirit like soju as long as it's imported, either soju or shochu, and under 25%. So because of that one loophole law, I remember the ABC agents thinking that was the case. All I needed was a beer and wine license to distribute, and that was totally wrong. We were trying to enter a competition. I think it was LA Spirits competition. And they're like, we need a copy of your license. So we sent it over to them. And they're like, yeah, this is the wrong license. And we're like, what? What do you mean? We're shochu. You can sell at beer and wine restaurants. Like, yeah, that's fine. But if you want to distribute it, it has to be a distilled spirits license. And so right away we had to go through the whole process again and get licensed for distilled spirits.
But before all that, when you're starting the company, you went to ABC. And then what do you do next? How do you get this company off the ground?
It actually took probably probably about 2 years from when we had the idea of starting it to actually receiving our first sample shipment. And everything that happened in between was just figuring out every kind of step that was necessary to get licensed, to be approved, to make sure we were zoned correctly, because we're working out of our apartment, making sure our apartment was zoned okay, to convincing the distillery to give us the license or the rights to distribute, and not just the rights, but the exclusive rights. And of course, at first they're skeptical, like why should we give, even though we're not selling in the States yet, why should we even give you the exclusive, So there was that. My wife's brother, Taro, was living in Tokyo, and whenever he found himself in Kagoshima for business, he would meet up with them. And so he would kind of talk to them about, the different steps we needed, where we were in the process, what our plans were for marketing and branding. We looked at the current shochu market and came up with a few points that we thought would make us distinct in our approach to selling it. And we presented that and said, hey, this is what we want to do. What do you think? And I think that was kind of where they started at least considering the idea and eventually saying, okay, let's give it a shot. Yeah, and then going through the process of getting licensed, which was really kind of tough, especially if you don't know anything about alcohol. And you get the wrong advice from the ABC. But I remember, it's funny, so I'm living in this apartment, right? And one of the steps to get licensed for alcohol is you need to put one of those big white signs on your front window saying public notice of alcohol license in progress. And then anyone in the area has the right within 30 days to write a complaint. And if there's a single complaint, then you basically can't run the business. So I remember writing a personalized letter to all of my neighbors saying, listen, I'm not opening a bar out of our apartment. We're not going to be selling alcohol here. This is just the office for our future importing distribution company. And so luckily no one complained.
At this point, you're in several states. Where can people get Nankai Shochu at this point?
We are currently in California, Nevada, and Hawaii.
And where do you think you might go after that?
Definitely New York and Texas. We did look at Seattle or the Washington and Oregon area, but the alcohol taxes to import there are really expensive. One of the main challenges I think with shochu is in Japanese culture. I think a lot of people consider shochu it has to be an affordable drink, and so you'll see it all the time in the markets around here. Everyone's having this price competition to bring the price lower and lower and lower.
Okay.
And even though it's a handcrafted spirit for the most part, we're treating it like a commodity. And I think that sends the wrong message. And so even though we have a premium product in our hands, it's really handcrafted, vacuum distilled, small batches. It's worth $30, $40 that set at retail. But to kind of get to that point of people accepting that, especially for an unknown category, it's going to take some time. And so hopefully when that momentum catches up and we revisit Washington, Oregon, then they might not worry too much about the price.
So how are you getting the word out about Nankai? I mean, I see you obviously on Instagram. You go to a lot of different bars and restaurants. You do some shows.
We do a lot of events, 2 or 3 events a week of some kind. So weekends are generally kind of the major events. And then we'll often do like a tasting demo at a restaurant or a bar. We'll do cocktail contests. We do a lot of collaborations with different bartenders and mixologists. Particularly, I think our shochu really does work well in cocktails. And so we've had the luck and the privilege of working with some of the top bartenders in LA and San Francisco. And so they've come up with some really cool stuff. And so we'll use that as a launching point for a lot of our word of mouth. We do a lot of tasting demos, basically kind of educating the public on shochu, the difference between shochu and sake, the difference between shochu and soju, the difference between shochu and vodka. I remember one of the stores that we worked with early on, I remember how surprised they were because typically a shochu demo, they were used to selling maybe, 12 bottles a day. We were selling anywhere from 30 to 40 bottles a day doing these demos. So I think once people try it and taste it and then hear about all the health benefits of shochu, they think it's worth looking into trying.
I know from personal experience because, I had my neighbor, Andy, who ran into you.
That's right, yeah.
I gave him a sample of it, and then I think you're at Tokyo Central.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought was hilarious, like the next day or something.
It's funny, yeah.
Yeah.
And right away, he was like, a friend of mine introduced it to me in my building, and I just had to get my own bottle. And I was like, are you talking about Frank?
And it was the same thing. Like you're saying, it's approachable.
Yeah.
As soon as he tasted it, you could see the look on his face. Like he was surprised because he was probably anticipating something that was going to be a little bit more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's funny. So our hope with shochu is we want to be the Patron of shochu. Obviously, volume-wise, but more on the ends of like, I remember before Patron, no one that I knew really drank tequila. Definitely not the more expensive brands, the sipping brands, right? It was always Cuervo margaritas or, cheap Cuervo shots or whatever. And Patron was the one that really kind of came in at a mid-tier premium level and said, listen, tequila is something more than that. And it was an easier to drink tequila, that kind of opened people's minds and eyes to try something new. We're hoping that as people really start drinking Nankai Shochu and kind of getting into that easy to drink, approachable style of shochu, eventually their palates will open up and they'll try the more complex sweet potato and barley. And
so do you hope in the future to carry other shochus as well?
Absolutely, yeah. Our goal as a company was to promote shochu. Like, I'll give you an example. So we have a barrel-aged product, Nankai Gold. It's definitely upper tier. It's pretty expensive. And it's a blend of 5 different versions of shochu that we've aged different ways. It's very complex, right? So that was kind of our answer to trying to draw in the whiskey lovers of the world to try shochu. And so, we're looking at trying to bring in a rice shochu, for example, to try to entice more of the sake lovers to try shochu. Or we might bring in some of the funkier sugarcane ones to draw in the rum lovers. So yeah, we're definitely looking at different kinds of shochu just to kind of have that range of product. Our next product will actually be a fruit infused.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. They grow their own fruit there at the distillery.
Okay.
And so I remember one of our visits, we saw some of the workers at the side macerating fruit. I'm like, what are they doing over there? We're like sitting over all these buckets of plums and oranges. And then we found out later that they were preparing the infusion for upcoming shochu.
Well, where can people find out more about you, about Nankai?
So we've got our website, nankaishochu.com. Our Instagram, Nankai Shochu Official. In California, we're in most, if not all, the Japanese markets. We're also in Total Wine, Ralph's. Yeah. And then in Hawaii, we're in Tamura's, Foodland.
You can find Nankai Shochu and Nankai Gold throughout Hawaii, California, and Nevada. In the next episode of the Drinking Buddies show, I'll bring back sake expert Greg Beck, along with today's guest Paul Nakayama, for a tasting including sake, Nankai Shochu, and our very own Ryu Senbei. Thanks for listening to the Drinking Buddies show. I hope you liked it. Be sure to subscribe and share with your buddies. Check us out at www.thedrinkingbuddyshop.com and connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Take care and drink well.